cities to see if I'd ever been in trouble. They went and met with all my former bosses from all the companies, wherever I worked from high school on, and talked to the former bosses asking, hey, what kind of worker was Don? Did he show up to work on time? How did he treat the customers? How did he treat the co-workers? They went up and down the streets, any neighborhood, wherever I lived. They would talk to the neighbors on either side asking about me. How did I treat people in the neighborhood? You know, did I stay out late partying or was I home studying? And they would stop random people on the streets. And had there been social media back then, guess what they would have been doing? They would have been checking everything on social media. You know, even 20, 30 years later, they will be searching for that. That's why you got to be so careful today. So when I heard NASA was doing this detailed security check, I thought this is a great sign. I didn't think NASA could be doing this to all 100 people they interviewed. I figured they must have selected their astronauts, and this is the final check to make sure you're good to go before they announce the names. So I was pretty excited, and it was about 3 months later I got the phone call from NASA. And they called me up and said, Don, thank you very much for applying. We had a lot of good candidates. We did not select you, but good luck in the future. And I hung up that phone and I was devastated. I thought I had made it in that time, but here for the third time, NASA said no. First time was no, second time no, third time they interviewed me and got to know me, the result was the same, no. So there was a big message for me from NASA, right? We don't want you. That's the way I felt. So I decided at this point, I need to give up on this silly dream of mine. You know, I gave it my best effort, I worked hard, I tried 3 times, but NASA just didn't want me. So I decided I would go to bed, get a good night's sleep, and then in the morning when I woke up, I would put together a new plan for my career that did not involve being an astronaut. I went to bed that night, and I remember clearly that next morning when I woke up, the very first thought that popped into my head was, I still want to be an astronaut. So I asked myself, again, are there any more of these little things that I can do to improve my chance for that next election? And by studying who NASA was selecting, who they weren't selecting, it was clear most of the civilian astronauts that NASA was selecting, they were individuals that were already working down at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. It wasn't a requirement, but it sure seemed to help. So I quit my job. I drove from New Jersey down to Texas. I got a job as an engineer working for NASA on the space shuttle program. I did that for 3 years. Then there was another astronaut selection, sent my application in. I got called up for the medical testing and the interviews once again, and that all went very well. And then this time it was 3 or 4 months later, I got another phone call from NASA. And this time they said, Don, are you still interested in being an astronaut? Because we'd like to offer you the job. I said something very intelligent. You can quote me on this. I said, habada, 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 ha. And I finally got the words yes out of my mouth. And then I hung up the phone and I was jumping up and down, yelling and screaming for 10 minutes because I knew I made it into the program. I didn't know when I would fly in space in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. There's no guarantee, but I knew I'm in the line, I'm in the queue to go into space. It was really amazing to get that call. I was 35 years old when I made it into the program, and I started a 4-year training program for my first flight. So the first time I made it to space, I was 39 years old. 39 is pretty much an old man, right? No? This is why I love coming down here. You're so polite. If I do this in New York State, guess what they say? Oh yeah, you're way old. So you're very polite. But some of the careers you're going to pick, it's going to take a while to get there, okay? But it will be worth it for you in the end. So just a quick question for you. What do you think the lesson is from that story I just told you? Right here. Working hard. You know, there's no getting around that hard work. For many of the careers you're going to pick, it will take hard work. I know you're working hard right now in high school. You'll be working hard in college and afterwards. And sometimes it seems like, what am I doing working so hard? But it will pay off for you. Any other lesson here? Yes?
Don't give up.
Don't give up. That is the most important message I could pass along to you, to never give up. I almost gave up after NASA turned me down the 3rd time. And had I done that, I wouldn't be here today sharing with you these experiences. Anything else? Yeah.
You will fail before you succeed.
You will fail before you succeed. Failure, we have had that phrase out there, failure is not an option. You know, that came out of NASA. But man, we fail all the time. Every successful person you'll ever meet in your life, they failed along the way. What separates successful people from unsuccessful is that successful people learn from their mistakes. And you try to change things, improve things. Unsuccessful people don't. If I had just kept applying and hadn't changed anything, you think I would have made it into the program? No. I also needed to get smart on it, to figure out, okay, what am I missing? I couldn't call NASA. They're not going to tell me what I'm missing there. They would never do that. So I had to do some research, talk to people, just watch. Who are they picking? Okay? The last piece of advice I want to leave you with is to never listen to somebody who tells you you can't do something. When I was your age, Neil Armstrong was landing on the moon nearly 50 years ago. And at my school, I would tell my friends, hey, I want to be an astronaut. I want to walk on the moon. Can you guess what their reaction was to me? They laughed. They just laughed, said, you can't do that. You're not tall enough, fast enough, smart enough, whatever enough. Never listen to somebody who tells you you can't do something. If you've got that passion inside, you're willing to work hard, and never give up, as you mentioned. You can succeed and do anything you want to in your lifetime. Because I told you, I was just an average student. I'm not a Superman, I was just an average student, but I had a big, big dream, and I wasn't going to let go of that at all. And my family life wasn't the greatest either. My parents got divorced when I was about 9. My dad took off, never paid child support, just saw him a handful of times before he passed away. So I was raised in a single-parent household, and sometimes it's not the easiest. We were on government aid some of the time. But again, it's one of these things I had this dream, I had this passion. Nothing was going to stop me from doing that. And that'll work for you as well. So I went from this little boy just dreaming of going into space to getting assigned on 4 missions. This is the crew from my last flight, and the last time I was in space was 22 years ago aboard Space Shuttle Columbia. We've got 2 military pilots in the front row with the helmets that help us fly the shuttle. On the left-hand side with the helmet here is Jim Halsell. He was our commander. He was an Air Force test pilot. He used to fly the SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. Our pilot on the mission right here is Susan Still. And Susan was a pretty unique individual. She was only the 2nd woman to pilot the space shuttle. And Susan was one of our country's top Navy fighter pilots. So it was a great opportunity for me to fly with her on this mission. And then we've got 5 of our science astronauts. We're called mission specialists. Our job is to do the science on board. We work the robotic arm on the shuttle if there's a need for that. We deploy satellites and do spacewalks. So we each have our area of specialty on the crew. I don't know if you guys recognize this guy on the far right-hand side, but that's the way I used to look 22 years ago, before glasses, gray hair, wrinkles, and a few pounds around the middle here. Hey, no laughing about that. I heard that. Okay, there you see the shuttle on the launch pad. I took this picture the night before my first mission. Went out there about midnight or so with another one of the astronauts. And it was so amazing just to stand there right at the base of your space shuttle, all lit up with those bright lights against that pitch black sky. And as I stood there gazing up at it, I had incredible butterflies in my stomach. You ever get butterflies? Maybe before SATs or your finals, you'll feel a little nervous. And that's the way I felt. A little piece of me was nervous, a little piece of me was scared, but my main emotion was one of great excitement, because I knew 12 hours from when I'm taking this picture, I'm going to be sitting up there blasting off into space, and I almost couldn't believe where I was and what I was about to do. So they bring the astronauts out here on launch morning. We take an elevator up the side, we walk across this access arm, and we crawl through a little round hatch to get inside the shuttle. There I am in my launch suit 3 hours before liftoff. I've taken the elevator up, standing in front of Space Shuttle Columbia there, and they strap us into our seats one at a time. So I'm just out here waiting. When it's my turn, they'll say, hey Don, we're ready for you. I'll turn that corner, walk down that access arm, and at the end of it, you see the round hatch there on the side of the shuttle. Before I climb on board, these 2 guys in the white suits will help me put on a parachute. We'll get the helmet on, gloves on. Once everything checks out, I get on my hands and knees, crawl on that white board, and get inside. We're sitting in seats inside the shuttle, similar to what you're sitting in today, but because the shuttle is tilted upright for launch, we're not sitting upright, we're actually laying down on our backs with our knees kind of tucked up, over us. And once we're all strapped in, we've got shoulder harnesses and a seat belt, like when you were in a car seat when you were a lot younger. They strap us in good and tight, because there's a lot of shaking and vibration during launch, and you don't want to bounce out of your seat. But once they strap us in, they close and seal that side hatch, then everybody moves away from us about 3.5 miles. And it's very quiet inside the shuttle up until 6 seconds before liftoff. At that point, the 3 main engines at the tail of the shuttle start coming up to full power. We're still physically bolted down to the launch pad at that point. Computers are checking everything. Once the computers say those 3 engines look good, then we light our side rockets called solid rocket boosters. The instant they light, boom, immediately you take off. And laying on my back in my seat, I could hear the roar of the engines. I could feel all this shaking and vibration going on. And right at liftoff, I felt this push in my back. And it felt to me as if somebody had their hand right in the middle of my back and that they were pushing me up into the sky. And that's what the shuttle's doing, literally pushing us, tossing us up in the air. This picture's taken 4 seconds after liftoff. We're going 120 miles an hour already. 8.5 minutes later, the engines shut down, it's perfectly quiet, and you're in space. Only takes 8.5 minutes to get to space. That was always amazing to me. I bet it takes some of you more than 8.5 minutes to get to school here in the morning. And think about that, in 8.5 minutes you can end up being 200 miles above the Earth, and at this point we're traveling at a speed of 17,500 miles an hour. That's 5 miles a second. So imagine how fast you could get home tonight at 5 miles a second. Most of you would be home in 1 or 2 seconds. If you live far from here, maybe it would take 3 or 4 or 5 seconds to get home. And we go so fast that we orbit the Earth in only an hour and a half. So in the 45 minutes or so that we'll be in here today, if we were in space, we would travel halfway around the planet during that time. On 3 of my 4 missions, we had a science module in the back of the payload bay. We called it Space Lab, and it's very similar to one of our science modules up on the International Space Station. And once we got to space, we'd float through a tunnel, and we'd go back there and work on different science experiments. And typically during a 2-week mission, we'd work on 100 to 200 different experiments from scientists across the United States and around the world. I want to tell you quickly about 2 of these. I think you're all familiar with the shape of a candle flame, right? You know how it comes up to a point? Anybody here know why it comes up to a point like that? What causes that? Yeah.
The density below the flame is higher, pushing it up.
Yeah, hot air is lighter, right? Lower density, and it's at higher rising that draws the flame up to a point. You put your hand above a flame, you'll feel that hot air coming up. You put your hand below it, it's much cooler. In space, without gravity, hot air doesn't rise. Cold air doesn't settle. So instead of a flame coming up to a point, in space a flame will burn perfectly round. And what you're looking at here is a little pink droplet of butane fuel, like what we have in a disposable lighter. And we've set it on fire, and that blue ball, or halo you see there, is a flame burning. And it'll just float in the air, it'll burn perfectly spherical, and it'll consume all the oxygen around itself. And after a few minutes, it'll burn up all the oxygen and just go out all on its own. And scientists study things like this. They're trying to understand some of the basic fundamentals of combustion. How do things burn? And how does incomplete combustion take place when we have soot particles and other pollutants? And maybe from these experiments in space, we can improve our burning processes here on Earth for our power plants, our automobiles, things like that. We also do a lot of biology, life science experiments up there. This is an experiment I have. It's called the Japanese red-bellied newt. You can kind of see an orange belly there. And the newt would lay eggs. We'd put the eggs in little chambers and watch how they grow and develop in zero gravity. They were very similar to frog eggs developing into tadpoles and baby frogs. You'd see gills forming and tails and arms and legs. And we just photographed them every day looking for anything unusual. So we fly a lot of plants, a lot of animals up there, and they also do a lot of experiments on the astronauts. We lose our muscle strength in space. We lose our bone density. Our bones get weaker because we're not putting any force on them. And so they're always doing experiments on the astronauts as well. This is Chaki Mukai. She was the first Japanese woman in space, and I flew with her on my first mission. And in space, you don't walk around like we're used to doing here. When you want to move around in space, it just takes the smallest push with your finger, and you go sailing through the air like Superman or Superwoman. And you'll keep sailing until you hit a wall or until you reach out to stop your motion. If you like doing somersaults, you can start flipping in the air. And you go round and round all day until you get tired and you reach out to stop your motion. So does it sound like fun up there?
Yeah.
We have a blast. It's a lot of fun just floating around. Here's Susan Still, the pilot on my last flight, and Susan's typing on a laptop computer here. And I want to point out one feature. You see how she's got her toes hooked on that vertical gold pole? If she didn't do that with her toes, every time she would hit the keyboard on the computer, what would happen? She'd go bouncing off. I think it's Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. But if she just pinches it a little bit with her toes, she can stay in position, float in the air, and type on the computer all day long.